Located in Paris, this is the tomb of legendary scientist Marie Curie. It's lined with an inch thick of lead since her remains are still radioactive to this day. A Nile crocodile named Gustave has killed as many as 300 people in Burundi over the last 50 years. He's evaded dozens of capture and murder attempts as he can be identified by the 3 bullet scars on his body. The 2,000-pound monster croc is already nearly 20 feet long and is said to be still growing to this day. Morbid Facts, Part 305. Here's a 1997 photo of Las Vegas police facing Mike Tyson after he'd just bitten off the ear of Evander Holyfield during a boxing match. Tyson claimed he was in a primal, blacked-out state and literally wanted to kill his opponent. In 2013, a Brazilian woman confessed to lacing her cooter with poison so that her husband would die after going down on her. This fox drowned in a frozen lake and was cut out and displayed as a warning for people to keep off the ice. Just last week, an 88-year-old Frenchman caused an entire hospital to be evacuated for the strangest of reasons. He had a shell from World War I stuck inside of his anus, which the hospital considered to be a bomb threat, and a defusing team was called in. They determined the shell was not at risk of exploding and it was surgically removed by doctors. Morbid Facts, Part 307. Actor Mickey Rourke was a heartthrob of the 1980s until he quit his acting career to become a boxer. But after multiple facial injuries and botched plastic surgeries, he now looks like he's wearing a mask of someone else's face. Earlier last year, an Alabama man was arrested for criminal littering after putting flowers on the grave of his fiancée who died in a car crash in 2021. While filming an episode of Storage Wars, Daryl Sheets once discovered a dead body wrapped in plastic. Police later determined that the previous owner had murdered his wife and locked her body in a storage unit. Serial killer Edmund Kemper became friends with the very police officers that were investigating him. They called him Big Ed at the local bar and never would have suspected him in 1,000 years. When he initially confessed to being a serial killer, they laughed at him because they thought he was pulling a prank. Morbid Facts, Part 308. When Steven Tyler was 27 years old, he started a relationship with a 14-year-old girl. He took her on the road with him, got her pregnant, and forced her to have an abortion when she was only 16. United Airlines has repeatedly killed more pets per year than any other commercial airline by far. Here's footage of a World War I soldier experiencing shell shock, aka PTSD, when shown part of his uniform. Many of these men were executed by their own militaries since they were simply viewed as cowards at the time. Anton syndrome is a rare psychological condition that can affect people who suddenly go blind. They're unaware of their blindness and outright deny it since their brain generates false images causing them to believe that they can still see. Morbid Facts, Part 309. If Barbie were a real person, she wouldn't be capable of lifting up her own head and would have to walk on all fours due to her proportions. She would be severely anorexic and suffer from chronic diarrhea due to only having room for a few inches of intestines and half a liver. At some point during the Middle Ages, it was believed that sperm produced by the left testicle resulted in having a girl. So to ensure having a son, men would sometimes have it removed. Here's a photo of anti-war demonstrators protesting outside the 1968 DNC in Chicago. Shirtless protester Frank Plata was later drafted by the U.S. Army and killed during the Vietnam War. When Japan executes criminals by hanging, 3 different buttons on the wall are pressed by 3 different people at the same time. This is so that none of them know who actually did the killing, since only one button is randomly programmed to open the trap door. Morbid Facts, Part 310. In 2003, a skeleton measuring 6 inches long was found in a remote part of Chile's Atacama Desert. Due to its elongated skull and rather developed bones considering its size, the specimen was initially rumored to be an alien. But after extensive testing, scientists determined that it was more likely the skeleton of a stillborn human girl that had close to 70 different genetic mutations. According to a recent study, people in the US who were born before 1996 have a slightly lower IQ than those born afterwards. This is due to the negative effects of leaded gasoline, which was finally banned completely on January 1st, 1996. In 1924, gifted college students Leopold and Loeb planned out the perfect murders simply to demonstrate their superior intellectual abilities. But after kidnapping and murdering a child, they left an abundance of evidence and were swiftly convicted of murder. Morbid Facts, Part 311. This was the last photo taken of legendary rapper Tupac Shakur just minutes before he was gunned down on Las Vegas Boulevard in 1996. Tupac was hit 4 times and was put on life support at a nearby hospital where he would end up dying a week later. His body was cremated the next day, and members of his rap group Outlaws smoked some of his ashes after mixing them with some kush. Here's a 1907 mugshot of Bertha Baranda after she was convicted of mayhem for slicing off her husband's penis with a straight razor. In 1939, Gone with the Wind actress Hattie McDaniel became the first ever African American to win an Oscar. When she was dying from cancer in 1952, her final wish was to be buried in the Hollywood Forever Cemetery in LA. But the request was ultimately denied since the cemetery had a strict all-white policy at the time. Morbid Facts, Part 314. This is the unbelievable anatomy of conjoined twins Brittany and Abby Hensel, who are now 32 years old. Notably, they have 4 lungs but 1 rib cage, 2 hearts, 1 liver, 2 stomachs, 1 set of intestines, 3 kidneys, and 1 pelvis. Modern bulletproof vests were invented in the 1970s by pizza shop owner and former U.S. Marine Richard Davis. He came up with the idea after being wounded when a pizza delivery turned into a shootout. He shot himself in the chest nearly 200 times to test his invention. This is an example of a pillory which was used as a form of capital punishment in 19th century China. The man in the photo can't reach his hands to his face, so he must rely on pedestrians to give him food and water like a dog. The device also made it incredibly hard to sleep comfortably, essentially torturing the prisoner until they died from starvation. Morbid Facts, Part 315. In 1999, Martin Lawrence collapsed from heat stroke while jogging in heavy clothing to prepare for his role in Big Mama's House. He recovered in the hospital after entering a 3-day coma on a ventilator due to his body temperature reaching 107 degrees. This map published by FEMA shows the potential U.S. targets in a nuclear war scenario. If you're from the Northeast like me, you might want to start building that bunker. Morbid Facts, Part 290. For 24 years, Missouri woman Dee Dee Blanchard pretended that her daughter Gypsy had multiple chronic conditions. She claimed her daughter suffered from leukemia, asthma, muscular dystrophy, and had the mental capacity of a 7-year-old. Dee Dee forced her to stay in a wheelchair and act disabled, subjecting her to many unnecessary surgeries and medications. Gypsy was often fed through a feeding tube and supplied air through an oxygen tank. Her mother also regularly shaved the girl's head to give her the appearance of a cancer patient. Whenever Gypsy suggested that she wasn't actually sick, her mother would physically harm her. In 2015, Gypsy was finally tired of her mother's horrific abuse and sent her boyfriend to stab Dee Dee 17 times in the back. Today, Gypsy is still serving out her 10-year sentence after pleading guilty to second-degree murder of her abusive mother. Morbid Facts, Part 292. Shortly after returning from the moon, Buzz Aldrin fell into deep depression and addiction. He was quoted saying, "I wanted to resume my duties, but there were no duties to resume. There was no goal, no sense of calling, no project worth pouring myself into." Police in Pakistan are searching for a religious healer who reportedly convinced a pregnant woman that hammering a 2-inch nail into her skull would help her give birth to a boy. The woman became desperate after her husband threatened to divorce her if she gave birth to another girl for the 4th time. Lucy Studi from Iowa claims that her late father was a serial killer who murdered up to 70 women throughout the 70s and 80s. She told authorities that the man forced his kids to help bury the bodies, many of them thrown into a well that's since been filled in. Police aren't exactly sure how to approach it, especially since Lucy's sister says she's lying about the whole thing. Morbid Facts, Part 294. This iconic photograph of 28-year-old Marcy Borders covered in dust was taken just after the World Trade Center collapsed on 9/11. Marcy was a bank teller who worked on the 81st floor of the North Tower. She survived the collapse, but sadly died from cancer in 2014, likely caused by the toxic fumes she was exposed to. This is the gravestone of H.R. Giger, the Swiss artist and sculptor who designed the creatures for the movie Alien. On a British Airways flight in 1995, a woman was complaining of chest pain, so 2 doctors came over to check on her. They quickly realized she was suffering from a punctured lung and required immediate surgery. But the problem was they couldn't land for help since the increase in air pressure could kill her. So they performed mid-air surgery on her using a coat hanger, silverware, and a bottle of cognac for sterilization. Within 10 minutes, they'd saved her life. Morbid Facts, Part 295. In the summer of 2021, 40-year-old Jerry Smith was posing on Tinder as a woman named Angie Renee when he met 18-year-old football player Isamimen Itute. After they got together and went all the way with each other, Itute realized that Angie was a man. That's when the 6'3" linebacker stomped and beat the man to death. Just earlier this year, he was acquitted of all murder charges. This photo from the early 1900s shows nurses standing with mentally ill patients wrapped in wet linens. This treatment method was thought to be calming for patients, despite many of them constantly screaming to get out. Here's a photo of 14-year-old George Stinney Jr. being led to the room in which he was executed in 1944. He was given the electric chair after being convicted of murdering 2 white girls in South Carolina. The all-white jury determined he was guilty after only 10 minutes of deliberation, and he became the youngest person to be executed in U.S. history. Stinney was exonerated 70 years later after a court finally recognized that he'd received an unfair trial. Morbid Facts, Part 316. In 1991, a decomposing woman was found hanging from a shower in a New Mexico motel room. Despite an image of her being found in the room, she and the man in the photo still remain unidentified to this day. Her first name is believed to be Becca, only thanks to an anonymous tip given to police in 2021. The animal that causes the most deaths in the U.S. annually is deer. This is due to them blindly running into roadways, resulting in an estimated 200 deaths per year. The runner-up is bees, wasps, and hornets, accounting for around 60 deaths annually. Tennessee man James Washington was always the prime suspect of a 1995 murder, but there was never sufficient evidence to charge him. That was until 2012 when he was having a heart attack and confessed to the murder since he believed he was on his deathbed. But he ended up recovering and was convicted based on this confession, which he later tried to take back. Morbid Facts, Part 317. Bubble boy David Vetter was born with a severe immunity disorder where he basically had no immune system at all, meaning even the most harmless germs could easily end up killing him. Because of this, he spent his entire life inside of a bubble and could only receive air, water, and food if it had been sterilized first. At age 12, David received a bone marrow transplant from his sister, the only treatment available that would allow him outside of his bubble. But the marrow sadly contained traces of a dormant virus, and David passed away a few months later. Kidam Cave in Kenya is believed to be the original source of Ebola and Marburg, 2 of the deadliest diseases known to man. A 2007 expedition found evidence that the vector species was most likely the African fruit bat, or more specifically, their guano. Either way, the cave is known to scientists as one of the most dangerous places on the planet. Morbid Facts, Part 318. After Carrie Fisher passed away in 2016, her ashes were placed inside of an urn shaped like a giant Prozac pill. The giant pill was apparently her favorite possession since it was a reference to her battle with bipolar disorder. This famous mummy appeared to be satisfying himself during his final moments in 79 AD. To Catch a Predator was canceled in 2008 after a Texas district attorney took his own life when he was exposed as a child predator by the show. The entire scene was captured by an NBC camera crew that entered his home. In medieval Germany, a divorcing couple could legally settle their disputes with a marital duel. The man was given a weapon but had to fight out of a hole with one hand tied behind his back, while the wife could move freely with the rock-filled sack but had to wear weighted clothing. If the husband lost, he was beheaded, but if the wife lost, she was buried alive. Morbid Facts, Part 319. Former face of Subway Jared Fogle became famous after attributing his 275-pound weight loss to eating nothing but Subway for a year straight. But in 2015, the FBI completed a 4-year-long surveillance operation to bring him down for owning excessive amounts of CP. They began investigating after Fogle made some disturbing comments about children to a female reporter, who started recording her conversations with him and passing them on to the FBI. In many of these conversations, he bragged about molesting children and even asked her if he could put cameras in her kids' bedrooms.
What if they put a camera in your kids' room? Would you hear that?
Yeah.
Yeah? Would you rather have it in your son or your daughter?
Fogle was sentenced to 15 years after pleading guilty to his heinous crimes involving children and owning more than 5 terabytes of CP. Morbid Facts, Part 300. Princess Diana didn't die immediately at the scene of her car accident, but instead died 5 hours later due to a tear in the pulmonary vein of her heart. She would have had an 80% chance of surviving the crash if she had just been wearing her seatbelt.
Male genital transplant surgeons typically exclude the testicles when performing a transplant. This is because the deceased donor would become the biological father of any future babies produced by that nutsack.
In 2018, American missionary John Allen Chow illegally traveled to North Sentinel Island so that he could preach Christianity to an uncontacted tribe. He was well aware that the Sentinelese people were extremely violent towards outsiders, but he believed that God would protect him. Before he even stepped foot on land, he was greeted with an arrow through the heart. Morbid Facts, Part 301. Nicknamed the Merchant of Death, Russian arms dealer Victor Bout rose to power after the fall of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s. Using his fleet of 60 cargo planes, the arms he's brokered have helped fuel conflicts in countries including Afghanistan, Angola, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Somalia, Rwanda, Liberia, Sudan, and Sierra Leone. Willing to sell weapons to anyone who wanted them, Bout has supplied both sides of multiple civil wars and is said to be responsible for the deaths of tens of millions of people. He was arrested during a sting operation in 2008 where he was caught selling surface-to-air missiles that would have been used to kill American troops. But Victor Bout is now free thanks to a prisoner swap for WNBA player Brittany Griner, who was arrested 6 months ago after trying to bring a THC cartridge on a Russian airplane. Morbid Facts, Part 302. This 1994 photo shows O.J. Simpson holding hands with his children at the funeral of their mother and his ex-wife, Nicole Simpson Brown. She was brutally stabbed to death, most likely by O.J. himself, even though he was famously acquitted in court a few months later. During the funeral, O.J. reportedly spent a significant amount of time with Nicole's body and was even seen kissing her on the lips. Up until 1974, it was illegal to appear in public in the city of Chicago if you were ugly, and each offense was subject to a fine. The law was primarily made to prevent people with disabilities from going outside. While on his deathbed and completely unable to speak due to throat cancer, famous author Aldous Huxley wrote his final request to his wife to be given 100 micrograms of LSD. So she injected him with 2 separate doses of acid, and he died just a few hours later while tripping balls. Morbid Facts, Part 304. According to his former doctor, Michael Jackson's father had him chemically castrated as a young boy. He reportedly did this so that Michael would maintain his high-pitched singing voice into adulthood. The skin of certain fish species can be grafted onto severe burns and diabetic wounds. The material recruits the body's own cells and is eventually converted into living tissue. Moments of true horror. This photo is the definition of fear. A young woman from LA was evading a home intruder by hiding on her roof, where she managed to grab her phone and call 911. She said her greatest fear was that the intruder would try to hide where she was hiding. Luckily, authorities soon had the area surrounded and the man is now in prison. Here's some disturbing footage of an old lady with a knife approaching the front door of a New Jersey home at 3 a.m. As creepy as the footage may seem, the poor woman is most likely just suffering from dementia. And finally, this is why you should always be aware of your surroundings while scuba diving. This South African salvage diver nearly had his head taken off by a great white, but luckily the shark wasn't hungry at the time. The Dumbest Ways to Die, Part 3. Aeschylus was an ancient Greek playwright who is known today as the father of the tragedy genre. After receiving a prophecy that said he would die from a falling object, he spent most of his time outdoors. But he was killed when an eagle dropped a tortoise on him, mistaking his bald head for a rock suitable for shattering the shell of a reptile. Famous philosopher Kurt Gödel had an obsessive fear of being poisoned and therefore only ate food that was cooked by his wife. So when his wife went to the hospital for an extended stay, Gödel stopped eating completely and promptly starved to death. The first person to ever jump off the Brooklyn Bridge was a professional high diver. He wanted to demonstrate that people don't die simply from falling through the air, and he was correct. He fell 135 feet through the air without a problem, but hitting the water killed him immediately. Insane war tactics. During the Vietnam War, the U.S. conducted a psychological warfare scheme known as Operation Wandering Soul. The Army played creepy sounds and voices through loudspeakers to represent the spirits of dead Viet Cong soldiers. Here's an example of a recording. Badasses of history. After having his leg amputated due to cancer, 21-year-old Terry Fox started running across Canada to raise money for cancer research. Every day he ran a full marathon for 143 straight days until his cancer worsened, forcing him to stop. He ran a total of 3,338 miles, and his fundraiser has helped raise more than $600 million to date. Ludmila Pavlichenko, the most successful female sniper in history, struggled to pull the trigger on her first few kills. But that all changed when she saw a German soldier shoot a young Russian boy. She said, "He was such a nice, happy boy. After that, nothing could stop me." She went on to record 309 confirmed kills against the Nazis. During World War II, American Private Edward Ahrens was found clutching a sword surrounded by 13 dead Japanese soldiers. Clinging on to life, his last words were, "I guess they didn't know I was a Marine." At the age of 18, Major Donnie Dunnigan became the youngest ever drill instructor in the U.S. Marines. He served 25 years in the Marine Corps and was wounded several times during his 3 tours in Vietnam, earning himself 13 promotions along with 3 Purple Heart medals and a Bronze Star. Throughout his decorated career, he managed to keep secret that he was also the voice of Bambi in the 1942 Disney film. Lepa Radic was a 17-year-old Yugoslav resistance fighter who was sentenced to death in 1943 for shooting at the Nazis. As the rope was being tied around her neck, she was offered a way out of the gallows if she simply revealed the names of her leaders. But she declined, saying they'd reveal themselves when they came to avenge her. Dumbest Ways to Die, Part 1. In 1993, a Canadian lawyer named Gary Hoy claimed to a group of students that the windows in his building were unbreakable. To prove this, he threw himself at the window at full force. While the glass didn't break, the frame popped out and Gary fell 24 stories to his death. The man who once had the longest beard in the world died after he accidentally stepped on it and broke his neck. In 2010, an MI6 agent was found naked and dead inside of a padlocked bag in his London home. Police concluded that he accidentally locked himself in the bag and died as a result. In Houston, Texas, a 19-year-old man named Rashad died while attempting to play Russian roulette. Apparently, he didn't know how the game worked since he tried using a semi-automatic pistol instead of a revolver. The Dumbest Ways to Die, Part 2. Terry Kath, the original lead singer of the band Chicago, died after accidentally shooting himself in the head. In 1978, he picked up a 9mm pistol and said, "Don't worry about it, look, the clip's not even in it." He held the gun to his head, and before pulling the trigger, his last words were, "What do you think I'm gonna do, blow my brains out?" There was a bullet in the chamber, and he died instantly. In 1834, a 13-year-old boy died in San Francisco after a circus clown swung him around by the heels. In 2007, California woman Jennifer Strange entered a radio show contest called Hold Your Wee for a Wee, in which the person who drank the most water over a 4-hour span without urinating would win a Nintendo Wii. But after consuming nearly 2 gallons, Jennifer soon complained of headaches and dizziness before dying a few hours later from water poisoning. Here's a 1989 photo of South African spearfisherman Gerhio van Niekerk showing off his recent bite mark from a great white. He told reporters, quote, "It was a 1 in a million freak accident." While diving near Cape Town just 2 months afterwards, Gerhio went missing until his shark-bitten leg washed ashore a few days later. Morbid Facts, Part 296. In 2004, a Georgia man was found naked and beaten unconscious next to a dumpster behind a Burger King. He didn't have any possessions or ID on him and couldn't even remember his own name. When he looked at himself in the mirror, he recognized himself but realized he was about 20 years older than he thought. For the next decade, authorities struggled to identify the man despite TV coverage and a nationwide effort. Given the alias Benjamin Kyle, the man was unable to obtain employment without his social security number and therefore became homeless for several years. It wasn't until 2015 when he was finally identified through DNA testing as William Burgess Powell, born in 1948. But despite this discovery, there's still a 20-year gap in his life history with no documented records or anything he can remember. Morbid Facts, Part 297. Prior to filming The Dark Knight, Heath Ledger locked himself in a hotel room and talked to only himself for 6 straight weeks. He said this helped him land more in the realm of a psychopath to prepare for his iconic role of the Joker. Many believe this extreme dedication was partially responsible for his accidental overdose on sleeping pills the next year. A horrific bungee cord injury caused this man's iris to completely collapse. Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma used to be the wealthiest black community in all of America. That was until 1921 when a mob of white supremacists attacked the community with the help of the National Guard. Using guns, explosives, and even airplanes, they decimated 35 square blocks of the neighborhood and murdered hundreds of African Americans. It's known today as the Black Wall Street Massacre. Morbid Facts, Part 298. Octomom Nadia Sulman became notorious in 2009 when she had 8 babies as a result of in vitro fertilization. However, Nadia claimed that while she was heavily sedated, it was her fertility specialist that convinced her to have 12 embryos implanted in her at once. All of the babies miraculously survived, but the doctor had his license revoked for extreme malpractice. This violin was used by the lead member of the band that played on the Titanic. Just like in the movie, they continued playing as the ship went down. Former beauty queen Joyce McKinney made headlines in 1977 when she kidnapped 17-year-old Mormon boy Kirk Anderson from his church. According to Anderson, she chained him to her bed frame and forced him to be her sex slave for 3 straight days. But according to British law at the time, no crime of rape had been committed since the victim was male. Morbid Facts, Part 299. In 1981, David Kerwin was driving through Yellowstone's hot springs with his friend Ronald Ratcliffe and Ronald's dog Moosey. At some point, they parked their car for a better look, but Moosey suddenly jumped into one of the hot springs and started yelping. Even though many people warned him not to jump into the near boiling water, David dove straight in and attempted to rescue the suffering dog. He grabbed Moosey and made it close to the edge before letting go and sinking until his friend pulled him back out. Immediately afterwards, David muttered, "That was stupid. How bad am I? That was a stupid thing I did." He was immediately blinded since the hot spring had melted his eyeballs, and when someone helped to pull his shoe off, his skin came off with it. He sustained third-degree burns over 100% of his body and died the next day after living his final hours in agonizing pain. Sadly, Moosey the dog also did not survive. In 2013, Sweden submerged a neon sign of a gay soldier to deter Russian submarines from entering their waters. Using sonar, the sign emits the message, "This way if you are gay," in Morse code. There have been no reports of Russian submarine sightings ever since. The Dumbest Ways to Die, Part 4. In 1880, the Queen of Thailand's boat capsized on the way to her palace. But despite many witnesses, nobody dared to save the drowning queen and her daughter. This was because touching the queen under any circumstances was a crime punishable by death. Bobby Leach was a world-renowned daredevil who became the second person to go over Niagara Falls in a barrel. A few years later, he died from a vicious infection after slipping on an orange peel. In 1996, a man named Michael Paul was on his way home from church when he decided to crack his neck just like any other time. But a few minutes afterwards, he suddenly started sweating profusely and then went pale. By the time Michael was brought to a hospital, he had already slipped into a coma and died after 12 days of being on life support. An autopsy later revealed that the neck crack must have damaged one of the main arteries to his brain and resulted in a fatal stroke. Badasses of history. Vietnam War veteran Rick Rescorla was the director of security at Morgan Stanley when the Twin Towers were attacked on 9/11. After watching the first explosion from his South Tower window, Rick ignored the announcement that urged employees to stay put, instead grabbing his bullhorn and started evacuating his 2,700 employees. He encouraged them by singing Cornish songs just like he did in Vietnam and ended up saving all but 9 of his employees. Rescorla was last seen on the 10th floor of the South Tower, running up the stairs to rescue more people just minutes before the tower collapsed. The Dumbest Ways to Die, Part 5. In 2008, a Brazilian priest strapped 1,000 balloons onto a lawn chair and rode it into the sky as part of a fundraiser. He was able to reach an altitude of around 20,000 feet before losing contact with authorities. Over a month later, the lower half of his body was found floating near an oil rig. British entrepreneur Jimmy Heselden became the CEO of Segway Inc. after purchasing the company in 2009. The next year, he died from blunt force trauma after falling off a cliff on a Segway. Every year, about 150 people are killed by falling coconuts across the globe. Famous whiskey distiller Jack Daniel died after kicking his safe in frustration because he forgot his combination. He injured his big toe and it got infected, so he had to have his entire foot amputated. but the infection spread to the rest of his body and he died from blood poisoning. The Dumbest Ways to Die, Part 6. George Washington died when his doctors were trying to cure his sore throat. They were using a process called bloodletting, which involved draining a patient's blood until their illness was cured. He lost nearly half his blood before they stopped the treatment, and he died a few hours afterwards. 26-year-old Mark Leeson suffocated in his sleep after shoving 2 tampons up his nose before going to bed. Apparently, he was just trying to find a solution for his snoring problem. It's estimated that throughout the world, about 25 people are killed by champagne corks every year. A British student was once taking an exam and couldn't handle the stress and anxiety anymore. So he put 2 pencils up his nostrils and headbutted the desk, forcing the pencils through his brain. He died instantly and all the other students got automatic A's. The Dumbest Ways to Die, Part 7. A 57-year-old woman was riding a boat in Florida when an eagle ray suddenly leaped out of the water. The 75-pound ray smacked her directly in the head and she died almost immediately of a shattered skull. Attila the Hun was one of the most feared rulers throughout Europe during his reign, known for his brutal pillaging of Roman cities during the 5th century. But on his wedding night, he got drunk, fell asleep in his bed, and died of a nosebleed. A 17-year-old boy from Mexico City died after his girlfriend gave him a hickey. The suction created a blood clot that traveled to his brain, eventually causing a stroke. A Texas man was warned by bystanders to not go swimming in a harbor that was filled with alligators. But he shouted his last words, "F them alligators," before jumping in and being torn to shreds.